I've told this story before, but it's been a while. It's the story of a small town in the West with a rumor or a legend of a great, powerful gunslinger called Big Jim. He was a huge man, the story goes, rode on a massive horse, like a draft horse, a Clydesdale type of horse. In order to carry his overly large body, he was a legend. His notorious reputation preceded him, and every mention of him would strike fear in the hearts of all. One day, the news arrived in the small town that Big Jim was in the area and that he was coming to their town. Well, the town cleared, as you can imagine. The shop owners boarded up their windows. The only place in town that wasn't closed was the saloon. Why is it always the saloon? Whatever stragglers were left in town made scarce when they saw a huge shadow of a draft horse and a large rider spreading out down the main street. Silence descended on the town as the massive man and horse made their way toward the saloon. He dismounted, tied his horse to the hitch, and proceeded to walk into the saloon. Those who were still there swore that the man's footsteps were as heavy on the ground as the horse's. He sat down at the rail in the saloon. No one spoke. The piano player had ceased to play. The men that were there slid down almost instinctively in their chairs below the tables just to protect themselves, an instinct to cover. The barkeep slowly rose from behind the bar, knowing that he had to do something, and he asked what the stranger would have and if he was going to be staying long. The large man looked up with a start, shooting a look at the barkeep that nearly did him in as much as any bullet would have done. "No, I ain't staying," said the large man. "Haven't you heard? Big Jim's coming." In Advent, we get that word that someone is coming. Something large and game-changing is coming into the world. That word is delivered by someone who looks like a Big Jim, but he's not. John the Baptist, a forerunner to Jesus, said that he was so insignificant to the one who was coming that he couldn't even do the servant's job of untying the laces of his shoes. He's a forerunner, someone who's preparing the way. Oh, he looks an awful lot like Big Jim. He sounds an awful lot like Big Jim. He gets a lot of attention and a lot of expectations turned toward greatness and great hopes. I thought I would, just for my own enjoyment, start the sermon the gospel reading the way I did by calling you a brood of vipers, just to see what kind of reaction you had. You really didn't have any. I was sort of surprised. I would think that John's crowd probably had a bigger reaction than you might have. Maybe you didn't think I was actually speaking to you. Maybe I was, maybe I wasn't. John's fairly old school preacher. He has 3 points. The first point is warning the crowd of the coming end of time. The second revolves around ethical advice, instructing his hearers how to prepare for that particular end, how to live in the meanwhile. And the third point is the announcement and expectation of the Big Jim, the one who really is coming into the world, the Messiah. Now, the gospel verse ends with this. People were filled with expectations, and all were questioning in their hearts concerning John whether he might be the Messiah. They were expecting big things from John the Baptist. They were thinking that he was great, that their expectations were mounting toward greatness. There's a story of Abraham Lincoln, who used to attend church every Wednesday evening when he was in office in Washington, D.C., at the New York Presbyterian Church near the White House. I don't particularly know that church, but apparently it's near there. One Wednesday evening, as Lincoln was leaving the service, one of his assistants asked him, "Mr. President, what did you think of the sermon tonight?" And Lincoln responded, "The content was excellent." One of his assistants, the content was excellent. Mr. Gurley spoke with great eloquence. It was obvious that he put a great deal of work into his sermon. "Then you thought it was a great sermon," said the assistant. "No, I didn't say that." "But sir, you said it was an excellent sermon." Lincoln replied, "No, I said that the content was excellent and that the preacher spoke eloquently, but that Dr. Gurley on this night forgot the most important thing. He forgot to ask us to do something great." What's striking about our gospel lesson, you better look at it again, because John's such a scary figure to us. He's such a strange hippie out there in the wilderness that we sometimes think his words are weirder and larger than they are. But what's striking about John's words, these points to the crowd, the tax collectors and the soldiers, put alongside the drama of the end-time warning and the expectation of the coming Messiah. John's ethical teaching seems kind of lame, small. What advice is he giving? What shall we do now that times are so desperate, now that the time is so near? What should we do? John basically tells them this: be honest. Collect no more than what's prescribed for you. Be kind. If you have 2 coats, give one of your coats to those who has none. If you have food, do likewise. And work hard and don't cheat. Don't extort money from anyone by threats and false accusations, and be satisfied with your wages. Now, I'm kind of tempted to think, wait, come on, John. I mean, we all learned that in kindergarten, right? I mean, these are be honest, work hard, be kind. We all learned that in kindergarten, if we were in remedial, at least by 2nd grade, when we were starting to figure out how to break those rules. Is that really what it takes to avoid eschatological judgment? Apparently for John, that's it. Or more accurately, perhaps it's more that everything from warnings and expectations to ethical encouragement looks differently in the light of Christ's coming. We know what that's like. Did your life not shift somehow after San Bernardino? Did you hear people asking, what should we do? And we heard people suggesting 3-point sermons as to how they should respond. Get out a door, hide if you can, and fight. What should we do? After 9/11, this church was packed. We had an average attendance of almost 200 every Sunday for about a year. And then those folks who came after 9/11 began to leave again. The edge was gone. The worry was gone. But I think John's advice is actually pretty good, even for the times in which we find ourselves. Jesus' coming, John implies, affects every dimension of our lives, including how we regard each other and the obligations to one another we have and to our world. Those obligations. The kingdom, that is, doesn't show up in grand action or heroic deeds, but rather in the simple acts of sharing what we have, being honest with each other, working hard, resisting the temptation to cheat or to be bullies. We're helping to usher in the kingdom that Jesus will soon announce. Okay, we don't bring the kingdom. We don't initiate the kingdom. It's not something that we are in charge of. But it seems like one of the chief ways through which we can witness to God's presence or kingdom among us is actually to live like it's actually here. Like we believe it's actually coming. You know what I mean? Like it really makes the difference. I don't mean on Sunday mornings when you get up early, and I appreciate your commitment, but I mean on Monday morning when you're driving to work and you're urged to raise your hands at people, not in prayer and praise, but in some other sort of gestures. Or in the workplace when you decide to use anger in vindictive actions. When you decide to manipulate and control people, when you decide to become underhanded in order to manipulate people more powerful than you, even within your own families, that's when you should act like this stuff really matters, like it's really real, that the one who has come, the one who is coming, is already watching over us. It's not the grand actions and heroic deeds that really matter. It's the simple acts of sharing what we have, the being honest, and the refusing to be jerks. Which means that we all have an equal opportunity all around us to be ordinary saints like John talks about today. Unless we think that everyday actions of being honest, of being kind, of being hardworking don't matter, ask yourself this question. What would it look like if our presidential candidates, all of them, running for president, would act in those three simple ways? What would it be like if our elected leaders acted in those ways? Or law enforcement, or soldiers, or drivers on the freeway, or shoppers in line waiting to check out in the mall? I suspect that the world would be a better place, wouldn't it? But let's not stop there. Let's even get more personal. What would it look like if we went out from church looking for opportunities, that we went looking for opportunities to be honest, to be kind, and to be hardworking? What if we determined to seek out such opportunities because we've heard that extraordinary acts of grace are within the reach of ordinary people, and that through those extraordinary acts of grace that people get a glimpse of the one who's coming into the world and see opportunities for themselves? What if we believed and acted on our belief that being honest, kind, and hardworking in a culture that is impatient, immature, and fearful, that those things really make a difference? Imagine, what if we acted like this stuff made a difference? Now keep in mind where we're at. And I don't mean where we're at like 2 weeks shy of Christmas, although that's also true, and that probably struck fear into the hearts of some of you by reminding you how short the time is. But we're living in a nation, and we're living more and more in a world constantly afraid of the next terrorist crime or random act of violence that will happen just around the corner of our house. And because of this fear, we begin to change how we live, and at times even risk forgetting who we are. We are God's children now and forever. Children of grace, children of mercy, children who receive God's abundant grace. And we are also Americans with values of religious freedom, with values of the dignity of persons, with the understanding that we are to seek justice for everyone. For we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all were created equal. You can go on in your head, but the sermon would be quite long if I finished it. And when we forget that, we are God's children now and forever, and nothing and no one can change it, and that we are Americans living toward certain values, not values of the past, but we're living toward them. We're living in the future of those values, not the past of them, but into the hope of them. If we forget, we've lost already, even if a terrorist doesn't take one more life. So what might happen if we pledged that in light of the dangerous world that we've really always lived in, but sort of was sheltered for a while from, that we intended to redouble our efforts to be honest, to be kind, to be hardworking, meeting the needs of those around us, reaching out to help with those who struggle, and in all these ways to witness to our confidence that the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus made a difference, makes a difference, will make a difference. I think what would happen is that we would not only noticeably see a world that would be better, but a more vibrant church, a more believable church, a more authentic church, a church that's less likely to be looked at and gone, those people are crazy, unless it's crazy with God's love. One animated by John's conviction that all flesh shall see the salvation of our God. Imagine such a vision before ourselves. I know this can all seem like small potatoes when you're watching it all unravel on MSNBC or CNN or Fox News or the local channels. I know, it's small potatoes, doesn't it? The gospel's always been small potatoes. Because there was a guy who was born in an oppressed nation in a tiny little town on the outskirts of a forgotten nation in a barn to peasant parents who never traveled any further than the nation of his homeland, maybe Egypt, but as a baby, who died as a criminal at the hands of the overlording nation, who was among thousands of those who were crucified, but we remember no one and nothing. And you probably wouldn't even know Caesar Augustus if it weren't for him. And certainly wouldn't know Pontius Pilate if it weren't for the creed. And those great nations, and those great people, and those great nations, and those great places of those times no longer are remembered. But that tiny little baby, in whom all flesh has seen the salvation of our God. I know it can seem like small potatoes when the world's falling apart and you're watching it in 3D live, HD on your 55-inch TV, and you think the world's on fire, but I would encourage you to go back outside and to realize it's not. Even in a part of the world where we're brittly dry, we're not even on fire. Yes, times are scary. Times are always scary. It's just the times have changed, so we're not quite sure what to do with it. But I think a part of John's message and Jesus' witness is that precisely because God has promised to redeem all creation, we are free. You can be free from those fears. You can be free from them because you're held eternally. And no one can touch that. And we, to go a little bit out of the preaching scope, are Americans. And we have amazing foundational documents with a vision that we haven't lived into yet. And it is for such a time as this that we are called to those things, to go back to those things, to live into those things, and as Christian people, to bring back to the preaching, to the pulpit, to live into the hope that is ours in Christ, to live in faith, in small deeds, and in big. There are, according to John and Jesus, no small gestures, but rather varied and contagious acts of random and both intentional kindnesses and honesties and hard working. It's a great day to have Lori come forward because it's been a long time of teaching. And, there's no great big shebang there, but every Sunday, in and out. Weekdays and vacation Bible schools and prayer warriors and a constant reminder of the hum of love into the lives of our children for entire generation. And that those acts, they make a difference in our world, particularly when we're caught up in the faith of Jesus, because God has drawn near to us in those small acts. And we begin to see the salvation of God and the good news of God's grace, mercy, and redemption, His plan for us all, that's unfolding in our midst. Prepare the way. By our lives, raise expectations. Love all. Give reason for rejoicing. God is near. God is here. What if we believed and lived those facts? Amen.